I've spent half my life in places where the sand gets into parts of your soul you didn't know existed, carrying a rifle for a government that promised me the quiet life once the shooting stopped. And for a while, I actually believed I'd found it. My name is Elias Thorne, and 3 years ago, my wife Sarah and I bought a piece of heaven on the edge of the Cascades, a sprawling 4-acre slice of timber and creek bed that sat just 6 inches outside the boundary line of a gated nightmare called, in quote, the Heights at Silver Lake. In quote, we didn't oppose T on the manicured lawns or the committee-approved mailboxes. We just wanted to be left alone so I could listen to the wind in the pines instead of the ringing in my ears. But apparently in modern America, wanting to be left alone is the ultimate act of aggression. It started with a woman named Beatrice, a lady whose entire personality was built on the foundation of a clipboard and a deep-seated hatred for anything she couldn't and oppose. T categorize. And she decided within a week of us moving in that hour, in quote, unrefined aesthetic, in quote, was a direct threat to the property values of her kingdom. She'd stand at the edge of our gravel drive, her toes literally a hair's breadth from the county line, staring at my 1974 Ford Highboy like it was a pile of radioactive waste, and she'd leave these little notes, these passive-aggressive masterpieces printed on cream-colored cardstock, telling us that, in quote, standards are what separate us from the wilderness, end quote. I ignored them. Sarah ignored them. We even tried the, end quote, kill them with kindness, end quote, route by bringing over a basket of apples from our trees. But Beatrice looked at those apples like they were poisoned, her nose crinkling as she told us that, end quote, unauthorized agriculture, end quote, wasn't oppose T permitted within eyeshot of the gates. I told her, as politely as a man with my temperament can, that unless she planned on paying my property taxes, she could take her standards and shove them into the nearest organic compost bin. And that, right there, was the moment the fuse was lit. For months, the harassment scaled up in a way that felt like a low-intensity conflict, with anonymous calls to the county about, in quote, illegal structures, in quote, whenever I build a woodshed, or mysterious black SUVs idling at my gate at 2 a.m., just sitting there, their headlights cutting through our bedroom window like searchlights. I knew the game. I'd seen it in darker corners of the world. It was the process of, in quote, othering, in quote, making us the enemy so that whatever came next would feel justified to the people watching from behind their silk curtains. Then came the man who called himself, in quote, Officer Miller, in quote, a guy with a military-style high-and-tight haircut that screamed, in quote, failed academy entrance, in quote, and a black tactical vest with, in quote, HOA compliance and AMP safety, in quote, embroidered across the back in aggressive, blocky white letters. He didn't have a badge, he didn't have a warrant, but he had a holster and a sense of entitlement that made my skin crawl, and he started showing up at my gate twice a week, citing, in quote, community safety protocols, in quote, that didn't oppose T apply to us, trying to bait me into a confrontation. The day it all went sideways was a Tuesday, a day that felt too heavy, too still, like the air was holding its breath before a storm, and I was in the back pasture fixing a fence line when I heard a sound that didn't oppose T belong in my woods, a sharp, choked-off gasp that made my blood turn ice. I dropped my pliers and moved, not running like a civilian, but moving with that low, heavy-footed silence that you never really unlearn, and when I rounded the corner of the house, my heart didn't oppose to stop, it shattered. There was Miller, his face a mask of sweating, twitching adrenaline, his arm wrapped around Sarah's neck, so tight her face was turning a haunting shade of lilac, and in his other hand was a serrated folding knife, the tip pressed deep into the soft hollow of her throat. He wasn't oppose to even looking at me at first. He was looking at her, whispering something about, in quote, pests, in quote, and, in quote, cleansing the neighborhood, in quote, and the way his eyes were darting made it clear he'd finally snapped under the weight of his own delusions. In quote, let her go, Miller, in quote, I said, my voice coming out in a low, gravelly rasp that sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone I tried to leave behind in the desert, and I raised my hand slowly, palms out, trying to keep his focus on me and off the blade. He looked at me then, and there was no logic in those eyes, just a frantic, jagged hunger for power. A man who had been told he was a sheepdog for so long that he'd finally decided to start mauling the sheep. End quote. She doesn't oppose. T belong here, Thorne. None of you do, end quote. He spat, his voice cracking like dry wood, and quote, Beatrice said you're an infection, and I'm the cure. I'm the one who keeps this place clean, and you think you're so tough because you've got a little land? You're nothing but a trespasser on our vision, end quote. I could see the tremor in his hand, a fine, high-frequency vibration that meant the knife was micro-cutting her skin with every breath she took, and I saw a single, thin bead of bright red blood start to track down her collarbone. And that was the exact moment the world went into slow motion. I've been in firefights where the noise is so loud you can't hear your own thoughts. But this was different. This was a silent, suffocating vacuum where the only thing that existed was the 3 inches of steel against my wife's carotid artery. I reached behind my back, my hand finding the grip of my subcompact, 9mm that I'd started carrying because of the SUVs at night, and I felt the familiar checkering of the polymer, the weight of the brass in the magazine, a cold comfort in a situation that was burning down around me. End quote. Miller, look at me, look at my eyes, end quote. I commanded, using that authoritative tone that used to make privates jump to attention, and for a split second, he obeyed, his ego demanding that he meet my gaze to show he wasn't in oppos. Afraid. In that heartbeat of a distraction, I stepped to the left, creating a narrow, precarious angle that cleared Sarah's torso by maybe 4 inches, and I didn't in oppos. Think I didn't in oppos. Aim, I just let the decades of muscle memory take the shot. The first round hit him in the high shoulder, the kinetic energy spinning him like a top, and the knife flew wide, clattering against the stone foundation of our porch as Sarah collapsed, her knees hitting the dirt as she scrambled away on all fours. Miller didn't in oppos. Fall, he just roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated animal rage, and he started to reach for the sidearm on his belt. The one I knew was probably a pellet gun or a blank starter, but in that moment I wasn't oppos. Taking a census of his equipment. I fired twice more, 2 rapid-fire thuds into his center mass that sounded like a hammer hitting a wet rug, and he finally went down, his body folding in on itself, the end quote, HOA compliance, end quote, vest soaking up the red that was spilling out of him. I didn't in oppos. Feel a rush of triumph. I didn't in oppos. Feel a surge of adrenaline. I just felt a profound, weary sadness that the world had followed me all the way to this mountain, that I'd have to smell cordite on my own front lawn. I reached Sarah in 2 strides, pulling her into my lap, checking the nick on her neck, which was shallow but angry, and she was shaking so hard, I thought her bones might break, her breath coming in these jagged, rhythmic sobs that tore at my chest. I didn't in oppos. To even look at Miller, I just held her, whispering things I'd done in oppos. To remember, while the silence of the woods rushed back in to fill the void left by the gunshots, and it felt like an eternity before I heard the sirens. I called in, of course, but the Silver Lake Police Department was basically a private security force for the HOA, and when they rolled up, 3 cruisers deep, they didn't in oppos. Come in with questions, they came in with rifles leveled at my head. I did the drill. Hands up, weapon on the ground, knees in the dirt, and I watched as they treated Miller like a fallen hero and me like a domestic terrorist, cuffing me so tight my hands went numb while Beatrice stood at the end of the drive, watching through binoculars with a look of grim satisfaction. The interrogation lasted 14 hours, a revolving door of detectives trying to get me to admit I'd lured him there, trying to paint me as the, end quote, unstable vet, end quote, who finally went postal on a, end quote, concerned citizen, end quote. But they had a problem they didn't end oppos. Anticipate. Sarah had been wearing her GoPro. She'd been filming her gardening for a little YouTube channel she started, and the camera had been sitting on the porch railing, capturing the whole thing in 4K. Miller's entry, his deranged monologue, the knife at her throat, and the way he'd lunged. When my lawyer finally got them to watch that footage, the room went very, very quiet because you couldn't end oppos. Argue with the sight of a man trying to execute a woman over a landscaping dispute. But the real kicker, the thing that still keeps me up at night, was what the digital forensics team found on Miller's phone after they realized he was going to survive his wounds and face a jury. It wasn't oppos. Just a few angry emails from Beatrice. It was a systematic, month-long paper trail of her, end quote, commissioning, end quote, him to, end quote, force a transition, end quote, of our property. She'd promised him a permanent, high-paying, end quote, security director, end quote. Position for the entire county if he could just get us to sell or flee. And she'd been feeding his mental instability with lies about us being part of some criminal syndicate. It was a corporate hit disguised as a neighborhood grievance. A woman so blinded by the, end quote, purity, end quote, of her zip code that she was willing to pay for a kidnapping to get her way. Miller is currently serving 35 years for attempted murder and kidnapping, and Beatrice, the queen of cream-color cardstock, is sitting in a women's correctional facility after being convicted of conspiracy to commit a felony, though she still maintains in every appeal that she was, end quote, protecting the integrity of the community, end quote. We didn't in oppose. T stay, we couldn't in oppose. T. You can't look at the trees the same way when you know blood is mixed into the soil. So we sold the place. Ironically, to a developer who turned it into a low-income housing complex, which I'm sure is making Beatrice scream at the walls of her cell. We're further north now, in a place where the nearest neighbor is a 3-mile hike and the only standards we have to meet are our own, but I still catch myself looking at the gate every time a car slows down, wondering if the next, end quote, concerned citizen, end quote, is just around the corner. Now, I gotta ask you all, because this is something Sarah and I debate every single night as we sit on our new porch. When does a community stop being a support system and start being a cult? Was I wrong to take those shots, or is there a point where, end quote, following the rules, end quote, becomes a mask for something much darker and more dangerous? I see these stories everywhere now. People being harassed over the color of their curtains or the height of their grass, and I wonder if we've lost the ability to just let people live. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever dealt with an HOA that felt like a regime, and how far would you go to protect your home from someone who thinks a badge, even a fake one, gives them the right to your life? I'll be reading the responses because, honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if I'm the hero of this story or just the man who brought the war home. Let's talk about it.